go. I wish you could see some of these pictures because they're going to be good. Oh, here we go. Okay, so let me go back. That's Harold in B-24. They actually, for this picture, have to make him stick his head out. So he doesn't actually ride like this at 290 miles an hour. So just to let you know. First of all, good morning to everybody. I kind of said thanks for everything, but I really wanted to thank everybody. This is a great community, and thanks for coming to hear me speak about somebody that really my family didn't talk about a whole lot. So it's been really a great journey for me to get to know Uncle Harold, great Uncle Harold. It's my dad's uncle, so my grandma Doris, and actually Chad's grandma Eleanor's brother. So if anybody knows Chad Kleinecht, Eleanor is actually, I want to thank her for her diary. Dad did a lot of research and got with Phyllis and looked through her diary. So a lot of these events that I'll talk about are from that. So everybody who wants to keep a diary, because then when you die, people will talk about you. I also wanted, this is really cool, if you're ever doing research on somebody that's served in a war, go on Facebook. I found the 446 bomb group, which is what Harold was a part of, and I actually met the author of the history of the 446 bomb group, and he was gracious enough to spend an hour and a half on the phone with me, kind of listening to my silly civilian questions and answered tons of questions for me. So he was awesome. And then through that same Facebook page, I met the co-pilot's nephew, which is, he'd be my dad's age. So kind of the same thing, and he's given me a lot of information. If you hear me talk about Claude Lamphere, that is Harold's co-pilot. So just to give you a reference. Okay, so Harold was born May 8th, 1922. So the other thing that's really cool about talking today is my great uncle Harold would have been 100 years old this year. So pretty cool. Nora told me a really cool story about how she got a ride from him. I don't know, she doesn't really want to say it. But when he dropped her off, he actually gave her a stick of gum, and back in that day, that was a really big gift. So Nora, thanks for that story. I know it kind of touched her and made her remember my great uncle, so that's kind of cool. Eleanor was the oldest sister, and you know Phyllis and Chad, hopefully, and anyway, I grew up with all these people. Uncle Vern had Janelle, Harold, and Jeff. They all kind of lived throughout the country. And then Grandma Doris had my dad, Gary, and Cheryl, my aunt, and Uncle Harvey. So he grew up in Pingree, North Dakota, in the same house, well, virtually the same farmstead that I did. So there's a picture on the back on the display, and it actually has a picture of the old house in the background by the barn. So Harold and I grew up in the same place. And my great-grandpa built additions to that house. This is a picture of him as a 13-year-old. And he actually was a little leaguer, and he had a chance to meet JFK and shake his hand. So kind of crazy. This is Harold riding a horse back on the farmstead. Dad told me that they actually used to have a barn next to Pingree School, which I didn't know that, but people would actually ride their horse to school and put their horses in the barn while they went to school, and I thought that was pretty cool. This is a picture of the family. This is Harold. This is my grandma Doris. This is Uncle Vern, and then Chad's grandma Eleanor. And that's in front of the house where I grew up. And here they all are, all cleaned up. This is Vern, Doris, Harold, and Eleanor. And then this is my great-grandma Hilma and Harry, Grandpa. Picture after, let me just, I'm going to give you a little timeline here. So, this picture was probably a high school graduation picture. After high school, Harold went for a year to Valley City Teachers College. And then, just to give you a timeline, World War II officially began in 1939, but for the United States, it began on December 7th, 1941. A lot of people would know that as the bombing of Pearl Harbor. There were other things that were happening too. I know there were some subs that were seen about 60 miles off the coast of Long Island. There were some other ships that were, I mean, obviously Axis ships, not Allied ships. So the enemy was off the coast of California. So I think from a standpoint of being in school, you would kind of think like, oh crap, maybe it's coming this way. So I think a lot of the soldiers decided we're going to go fight over there so it doesn't come and hit us here. And that bombing of Pearl Harbor, I think, was a wake-up call to everybody that it actually could come here. So patriotism was pretty big. Everybody pretty much wanted to enlist. President Roosevelt declared war, and there were so many soldiers enlisting at this time that some enlisted men had to wait for a class vacancy to begin training. Patriotism was everywhere. Everyone seemed to, they wanted to defend our country and protect us from the enemies. This picture, I believe, is a picture of the people who, okay, so after Valley City, Harold went to Fargo, and that at the time was an agricultural college, but he went there to enlist. And this, Dad thinks, is a picture of all the people who enlisted and were going to go into the Air Corps program. So, yeah, and Fargo was one of the locations that had been selected for the flight training program. And on February 7th, 1942, Harold passed his physical. Woo! That was in Elmer's diary. This is a picture of Harold as a cadet. In March, Harold officially entered the Air Corps program, and on March 1st, 1942, Harold flew for the first time. Okay, so Harold was called to Nashville, Tennessee for cadet training, and then he passed the Air Corps on September 19th, went into Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. Before they flew the heavies, they were trained in smaller planes. So he trained in, this plane is a PT-17, it's a Stearman, and he also flew an AT-10. So those are kind of the smaller planes that they trained people to fly in before they got into the big B-24. On January of 1943, Harold became a first lieutenant. According to notes taken by Dad, Harold had 60 hours in that Stearman PT, this one, and received his wings at Moody Air Force Base in Georgia, 9 weeks of basic training, and then he went to Alamogordo in New Mexico in July of 1943, where he trained in the AT-10s. So the 446 Bomb Group was started in Tucson, Arizona. On the 20th of April, initial equipment. It's amazing how much equipment. Think about like being over in England and having to load bomb after bomb after bomb into planes, and just think of the massive amount of shipping and stuff that they would have to do to get all that equipment overseas. But anyway, so they were going to have everything over at Alamogordo, which was at the time expected to be the first permanent station, but Lowry Field in Colorado became a location for first phase training. This is Harold and my grumpy dad. Now I know where I get it when I'm grumpy. He's not here to defend himself. Dad at the time was about 3 or 4, and this is Harold when he had come home on leave. There is actually a picture to his credit of him smiling, but we couldn't get a good copy of that one. So I said I'd put the grumpy one on. All right, and then you're welcome, Dad. This is a picture of Harold in his, this is a summer outfit, but you can see he's wearing a chute. All the pilot and the co-pilot would actually sit on their packs. So that if they had to bail, they didn't have to go find their pack. They had it ready, and it also, like I said, acted as a cushion for them. And then here's a second lieutenant picture of Harold. After receiving his commission in wings, he went on to postgraduate training at Lowry Field, and he became a member of the 706 Bomb Squadron of the 446 Bomb Group Heavy 20th Wing, 2nd Bomb Division of the 8th Air Force. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the B-24. As you can see in those videos, it's a pretty tough plane to fly. It's wide open, so they can't pressurize it, and they were sometimes up at over 20,000 feet. So you can imagine how thin the air is up there and how tough to breathe. They also were flying in the winter sometimes, so they had to wear a winter vest. They actually could plug in to the electrical system to have a heated vest. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. So they were underpowered. They had these big bombs that they had to carry all over the place, and there was a very likely chance of explosion on takeoff. The author that I was talking to talked about how thin. The thing that he thought was amazing was that the planes were so thin. He compared them to a Coke can, that they were that thin. So you can imagine any flak is pretty much going to hit the fuselage. So, and the reason water landing was suicide was the B-24s were built so that if they hit water or land, the nose would break off and the plane would sink immediately into the water. So that's why most B-24s, if they were going to crash, they had a better chance of living if they were going to land on the ground instead of in the water. And this was nicknamed the flying coffin because the exits were a little bit difficult to get to. All right, and then I wanted to show you a cutaway of the B-24 just so you could see. I mean, we saw it in the movie as well. Pilot and co-pilot are up here. There's a nose gunner up here. There's a turret. This ball turret is here. There's also one on the bottom, and then there are 2 waist gunners on the sides, and then there's one in the back. So you can see there's quite a few important roles. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and 6 gunners. Each crew typically had 3 specialists, a flight engineer, a radio operator, and an aircraft armorer. The flight engineer typically manned the top turret as it was closest to his station, but this was not set in stone. Sometimes the flight engineer would be one of the waist gunners. The radio operator was usually one of the waist gunners, but sometimes a nose gunner. Hardly ever the ball turret or tail gunner, as these positions would limit access to the radio because the radio's up in here by the co-pilot and the pilot. And then I wanted to show you this picture because this just shows you how big the B-24 is. Pretty big plane. And this is, when they release bombs in salvo, it basically means that they drop them all at once. So this is a picture of the B-24 dropping bombs in salvo. Okay, so now that he's gotten all his training, he's leaving Colorado, and they're going to head over to England. And they decided to go the southern route. So what that meant was they were going to have to go all the way around, all crazy places. So 59 aircraft left Colorado on the 20th of October, 1943. They went to the staging area in Lincoln, Nebraska. And in this is the place where they had to make sure that the crews were adequately trained and had the information they needed for a safe flight. They checked their clothing, everybody had a physical, their personal affairs such as wills, insurance, personal records were completed, route data maps, airfields, and runways were discussed. So from Lincoln, the crew went to Puerto Rico, then to Brazil, Senegal, Morocco, and finally landed at Clixton Hall. I kind of hesitate to try this, but we're going to try to show you. Everybody getting dizzy? Okay, so basically you can see he goes, let's move it over a little bit. So here he is in Colorado, then he goes to Nebraska, then he's in Fort Myers, Florida, they go to Puerto Rico, then they're over here. This is in Brazil, and then they fly up to Dakar, Senegal, and then they're over in Marrakesh, Morocco for a little bit, and then they finally reached Station 125 in England. So I'm going to try to get back to the presentation. Wish me luck. So, and then the air group was located close, and that town was called Bungay, and so they kind of nicknamed the 446 bomb group the Bungay Buckaroos. This is the control tower, a bunch of soldiers waiting for a plane to come in. And this is actually a picture from the barracks. Once somebody had painted a mural of the 706 logo. I think that's kind of cool. This is Harold in his winter attire. And this is actually at Bungay. This is on in Flixton. Just to give you an idea of this is his first mission. So he arrived in England on December 8th, and his first mission, I just want to read, this is from the history book that Harold Jansen wrote. Report says, Second Lieutenant Larson elected to continue his flight after generators failed in his plane called Old Faithful. The electric system went out, radio and turrets would not work, the propeller governors would not function. They made the run, released the bombs in salvo, flew back with an RPM of 2450, which according to them is really, really low. Broke out of formation at Hardwick and landed with almost no gas left in the tanks. So, I mean, just from the very first mission, they always had a lot to deal with. And this is not Harold's crew, but I just wanted to give you a picture of Old Faithful. And then through Claude Lanphier is Harold's co-pilot. His nephew was able to save the mission. So I have a copy of that back in the back if you want to kind of look through the different missions. But you can see that first mission was to Bremen, Germany, and then the last mission was to Blainville, France. They're all listed on there. So being co-pilot and pilot, I can assume that most of these missions were what Harold flew. And this is the kind of the main four. We have Claude. This is Claude Lanphier, Harold's co-pilot. This is Hafner, George Hafner. He was the navigator, and then of course Harold is in the right here. This is Harold. He was the pilot, and then Clifford Denning was the bombardier. So, and then I have another picture of them. They just decided to try to confuse me by changing their order. But Harold's here, and then that's his co-pilot, Claude Lanphier. All right, now we come to the sad day. So the 27th of April for the 446 bomb group was really kind of a bad day. It really started out horribly. The very first plane to go out, they did two missions. They did one in the morning and one in the evening. And the first mission, there was actually a plane that loaded 12 500-pound bombs into their plane and blew up on takeoff and actually took out 2 Royal Air Force people in the air in the Radio Shack. So that's kind of how the day started. And there was another crash that happened coming in about 20 minutes before Harold's plane came in. So they were attacking the airfields and marshalling yards in Blainville, France, and their target was a roundhouse in the marshalling yard. They were returning over that channel, the English Channel, and Lieutenant Larson had 2 engines on fire. So when I talked to the author of the 446 bomb group, he said that if there were 2 engines out on the right side, so in order to keep that plane level, he would have had to have been standing on the rudder just to keep that plane flying in. So, I mean, and you saw the guy trying to land the plane in the video at the beginning. It's a very physical plane, and it's tough to manhandle because it's so huge. So you can only imagine how much work it took for him to even just get back to England. Lieutenant Larson gave the order for the crew to bail out, and 2 crew members were actually able to parachute out before the aircraft exploded, killing the remaining 8 crew members, and they crashed into the cliffs in England. So there is positive of all of this. The mayor of Margate sent a letter expressing sympathy and appreciation for the action of the crew. He stated that witnesses on the ground observed the crews deliberately turning the aircraft toward the sea to avoid crashing into the town, and by their self-sacrifice saved significant damage to the town and further loss of life. So I thought that was pretty cool. This was the formation on the day of the crash. So Lieutenant Larson was here, and here's a picture of a successful bombing mission. They actually took pictures from the aircraft showing that they bombed the target. And then these are the crew members that were on the plane. I haven't been able to identify the back row, nor has the author of the book. So I don't know who the two who survived were, but two of these guys up in the back actually made it and parachuted out and returned to duty. All the rest passed away in the crash. Thanks to Claude Lanfear's nephew, this is how the government communicated with the family when one of the soldiers passed away. So they would send a Western Union telegram, and I was hoping Tony Cumber would be here because I know Carmen talked to him about, I think when he was 10, Carmen? When he was 10, the postal guy asked him to deliver this notice to our family. So thank you to Kevin for this. And then this is actually Claude Lanfear. This is Harold's co-pilot. This is his tombstone in England. So he went there, and I talked to him on the phone as well. This is really cool. He was there. He actually met the owner of the cemetery, and they took sand from the beaches of Normandy and rubbed it on the grave site so that the letters on the gravestone would show up a little bit better. Then they put a British flag and an American flag down at the base of the grave and let him take a photo. So I thought that was pretty neat. And then this is my great uncle's stone. These are his air medals. He was given he was awarded 3 oak leaf clusters. He's got his lieutenant bars in there in the air medal. He also posthumously was awarded the Purple Heart. So there's a quote from Patton that says, "We are not here to mourn the loss of these soldiers. Rather, we should thank God that they lived." I thought this was really neat. This is I came across this article when I was looking through Dad's big, huge 3-ring binder of all the information, and it references a commemorative memorial gathering that happened in 2009, and it was the 65th anniversary of this crash. So I contacted BBC Kent to see if I could get a hold of the broadcast, and I did. So if you have just a couple more minutes, I'm going to play you this broadcast. I guess you're kind of stuck here.
It's a little-known air tragedy in Kent during the Second World War is to be remembered in Thanet today. 65 years ago, 2 US Liberator bombers crashed on the beaches of Westgate and Fournes Point after returning from an Allied bombing raid over France. It's believed the aircraft ditched on the beaches to avoid hitting the town. 5 men died, 4 were injured in the disaster. At 5 p.m, dignitaries today will gather at the Westgate War Memorial for a flypast by a Piper Cub plane painted with US Air Force colours and a biplane. Ahead of that service, our reporter Alex Ward is getting behind the headlines to find out more. It's on the beach at Westgate. Hi, Alex.
Good morning, Dom. That's right. Well, this is bringing back childhood memories for me. I'm at St Mildred's Bay, on which I've spent many a happy summer's day. It's a wet, wild, blustery old day today, definitely not beach weather. And you can only imagine if they had conditions like this, how awful for those pilots. It's just this kind of grey sea stretching out before us, and the cliffs do rise up quite sharply at some points. And of course, that's part of what caused them a problem when they were coming in. I have with me 2 resident experts, as it were, on what happened. Councillors, local councillors, Alistair Stewart and Simon Moore. Now, guys, I gather you know each about, sorry, Simon, Alistair Bruce, I'm getting a neighbour on there. corrected it in my mind, but not on my script. But I gather you guys kind of know each about the crash that happened in your particular area. So Simon, start by telling us what was the crash that happened in your area?
The crash that happened in Westgate this day in 1944 towards dusk was a Liberator bomber which was carrying out a raid on Champs-sur-Marne. It was a 587th bomb group, and what happened, it was seriously damaged by enemy anti-aircraft fire, virtually lost its tail. Started to come down, the rear gunner jumped out over Holland, the rest of the crew stayed on board, and as it struggled to reach Manson, which was used as a forward base for landing bombers in distress, it found itself coming over Westgate, and rather than land on Westgate and damage the town and kill many people, the pilot decided to put it down on the beach and try and save the town. The bomber landed on the beach, 5 men were killed, 4 were seriously injured. The pilot received a Distinguished Flying Cross for that. But it was a tragedy I think we need to recognise, as of course the one at Fourness Point, which happened about 30 minutes later.
And I think Alistair's going to tell us about that. I mean,
This
really
is
heroic
this
actions.
is
Alistair,
Harold's
what
crash
happened
right
on the crash that happened in your area?
Well, indeed, a similar aircraft returning from a bombing raid in France was badly shot up, 2 engines on fire out of 4, and was making a low approach to sort of the Greenland that lands behind Fourness Point, sort of an area often used by damaged bombers. And unfortunately, the story I have been told was that it didn't actually make itself over the cliff top, landed straight into the cliff face and exploded almost instantly. And most of the crew, there were 10 on board, only 2 survived that terrible tragedy.
You can only imagine, Dominic, looking at the cliffs now, how awful for those men on board to face that prospect. They must have known, I'd imagine, that they weren't pulling up sharply enough. Horrifying stuff. But Simon, there's a bit of intrigue and mystery here. I gather a lot of the information was actually suppressed, as it were. It's taken a while to find out what all of this was about.
It was pressed by the Ministry of Information at the time. I only found out about it about 2 years ago when I was just researching out of interest because I'm a pilot, and came across this story, and the original story with a D notice slapped across it. I guess that most missions were secret at the time, and there was a document which was full of praise for the actions of the crew of Westgate for saving the town and obviously risking their own lives as a consequence, and also praising the people of Westgate who waded out onto the foreshore here to rescue the survivors of the crew and bring them in again.
Such stories of heroism, and Simon, as a pilot yourself, can you even imagine what it must have been like facing and confronted with knowing, maybe they didn't know much, but knowing what was about to happen?
It must have been a very dramatic situation because you're dealing with a multi-engined aircraft. You've lost your engines. In this case, the Liberator lost most of its tail. I suspect, because of its position, it may have been paralleling the coast because it needed to come down under the clouds to find out where it was and safely come into Manston. But of course, it's got no time. And when your engine's gone and you've got no time, there's very little you can do. And the pilot had to make an instant decision. He had to come in over the top into the town of Westgate, or desperately try and put it down on the beach on the sand in front. He tried the latter, and of course the crew paid most of the price, and he was the hero as a consequence.
Such heroism. Alistair, today at 5 o'clock, remembering these brave men, remembering a brave community.
Yes, indeed. It's vital that we continue this tradition of remembering these sorts of incidents, because we get a little bit slack, if you like, in this day and age with all the comforts that we have around us. And these young men paid the ultimate price for us. And I think a ceremony like this is very important. Don't forget, of course, during the war, this was Hellfire Corner. So there are lots of other incidents that occurred around the area of Thanet, but this one particularly has, for me, a great resonance.
People will want to come and see this, no doubt, for themselves, or find a spot to see these planes flying over the Piper Cub and also the biplane. Where's the best spot then?
Well, the best spot is really from where we are at the moment. It's the St Mildred's Bay car park on the Royal Esplanade. If, weather depending, the aircraft do actually take off and fly along the coastline here, this is the place to get the best view.
Gentlemen, and our reporter Alex Ward, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, so that was kind of cool. They also have a plaque. This is looking out over the place where great Uncle Harold crashed, and it commemorates his plane and the other plane that crashed that day. So if you're ever in England and you want to look that up, check it out. The other cool thing, there's only one more thing that I have to tell you, and then you can get up and stretch your legs. But in 1970, there was a beachcomber that actually found one of the dog tags. That's Lieutenant Hafner. So I thought that was kind of interesting that there's still remnants out there of that crash. So, but anyway, that got back to the family, which is cool. So anyway, I know everybody has their own personal story about someone who lost their life or served in the military, and that's kind of why we're here today. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. I love you all, and have a great day.
Well, thank you, Rissa. And that was a great presentation. And another reason to remind us how people sacrificed. So, anyway. So next we're going to sing God Bless America. Okay, I just got a few announcements. I guess I could introduce our cemetery board. We got Mike Tompkins, Joey Rand, Randy Lynn, Kurt Grimm, and myself. I want to thank Mike Tompkins for the wonderful care of the cemetery. It looks great. And then thanks to all who helped with the program this morning. Rissa Andres, Chris Nyes, John Gallagher, Pam Perligerberg for being the pianist, and Dale Gallagher is going to do taps for us. Dale's done taps for a number of years for us. And I also wanted to mention special thank you for all who have made donations and memorials to the cemetery, particularly in the last 2 years. We didn't really have a program, and your continued support is always appreciated. So, I looked out once and I thought okay. I looked out once and is it raining yet? Yeah. I think we're going to meet over the flagpole.
That's it. I think my mic today. Anyway. You go ahead.
I just wanted to share one other thing. Gary Andres has done an amazing job of researching a lot of information here, and in conversations with him, I found out about an abandoned cemetery that is southwest of Pingree, and he's done a lot of research. Mabel Manley actually has handwritten plot information about people there. There's names that you'd recognize on the list of people. You may not recognize the names, but you're probably related, or you know somebody that's related to the people that are buried out there, and it's an abandoned cemetery. And according to the North Dakota Century Code, this is additional research that Gary's done, the county is supposed to take care of abandoned cemeteries. And so we are on the agenda for the county commissioner meeting for next Tuesday, June 7th at 3:30. Would really appreciate any Pingree residents, Stutzman County residents. I live in Fargo, Gary lives in Bismarck. It'd be really good to have a show of support to move forward with doing something so that this abandoned cemetery gets properly cared for. I've just got a clipboard here. If you want to put your email address on or a phone number, just so we can communicate. But it's June 7th at 3:30.
Where is it at?
It's at the county courthouse.
On the cemetery.
Oh, the cemetery. I have the address here. 2129 68th Avenue Southeast. It is, it's the northeast quarter of Section 20 in Roundtown. There's about 2930 cemeteries out there. And the meeting is at 3:30 on June 7th. Next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
Your grandfather, Nora Moran's grandfather is buried there. Really, Jesus? Grandparents.
So,
Yeah.
I'll call on John for the benediction.
Thank you very much. I don't know where to go to follow that presentation. Think of what it cost to win that war. I'm going to share with you just a little bit of the benediction, the words of the Apostle Paul from Ephesians. He's writing from prison. And he says what his desire is for the people that he's writing to. And he knows that the letter will be passed on and circulated throughout the region, throughout the whole Christian church at the time. He says his desire is that Christ, verse 17, chapter 3, may dwell in your hearts by faith. God bless America. That Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth, the length, and depth, and height, and to know the love of Christ which passes knowledge, that you might be filled with all the fullness of God. And that is my wish for everyone this morning, and prayer for us all this morning. We are talking about troubled times, middle of last century, and we certainly are in troubled times in the first part of this one. Thank you, Father God, for this gathering, for Rissa's terrific presentation and all the research. Thank you for men like Harold Larson, so many thousands of others, men and women both, who sacrificed so much that we may have what we have today. Let us not forget their service, their sacrifice, and not forget to honor them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, John. So, I guess we'll meet at the flagpole at the cemetery to put the flags out. Thanks, everybody, for coming.